Indiana Fever star Aliyah Boston talks Final Four loss to Caitlin Clark. Then we met Caitlin. Aliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark are Indiana Fever teammates, both coming to the team as #1 overall draft picks, Boston in 2023, Clark in 24. Before that, they faced off in the 2023 Final Four. Boston doesn't sound totally over it yet. Boston and women's basketball legend Candace Parker answered a listener question about trying to win consecutive NCAA championships on their Post Moves podcast. Boston's South Carolina team had won the 2022 title and were heavy favorites to win in 23. After discussing Gamecocks coach Dawn Staley's approach to the 2022-23 season, Boston's voice started to trail off. "We made it pretty far. Then we met Caitlin," Boston said, making an sign in front of her face. Clark scored 41 points to lead Iowa past South Carolina 77-73 in a national semifinal, while Boston had 8 points and 10 rebounds. LSU, led by Angel Reese, beat Iowa in the championship game. "We just talked about conditioning and that game against Caitlin." "Crazy," Parker said with a laugh. "We're just talking about our trauma right now." Get Indy Star's Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark coverage sent directly to your inbox with our Caitlin Clark Fever newsletter. Subscribe to Indy Star's YouTube channel and join Fever Insiders Live. The confetti hadn't fallen for South Carolina that night. The crowd had found its voice and then lost it again, a wave that rose and broke somewhere between belief and disbelief. For Boston, the Final Four loss didn't arrive all at once. It came in moments. An extra step late on a closeout, a pass that arrived just a breath too soon, a shot that felt defended even when it wasn't. And threaded through all of it was one simple, honest line she would later use to explain the ending. "Then we met Caitlin." The phrase isn't an excuse. Boston has never spoken that way. It's a recognition of timing, of collision, of two forces meeting at the exact point where destiny gets loud. Before that night, South Carolina had been a machine built on discipline and dominance. Boston, the calm center of it all, was the axis. She played the game like she was solving it, possession by possession. Screens set at perfect angles. Post seals earned with patience. Defensive rotations that felt inevitable. The Gamecocks were used to imposing their will, to squeezing the air out of opponents until there was nothing left to breathe. And then there was Caitlin Clark. Clark didn't so much enter the game as she interrupted it. The pace bent to her gravity. Shots launched from places that felt unreasonable, until they weren't. Passes arrived like secrets shared at full speed. Every possession carried the threat of something audacious. It wasn't chaos. It was confidence sharpened into a weapon. Boston saw it from the opening minutes. "You could feel it on the floor," she'd say later. "The way Iowa believed, the way Clark kept calling for the ball with that familiar look, as if she already knew how the story would read. It wasn't trash talk. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty." For Boston, the battle was personal and collective at the same time. As a defender, she had responsibilities that stretched beyond the paint. As a leader, she had to anchor a team that had built its identity on control. But Clark thrived in spaces where control frayed. One step too far back and it was a three. One hedge too soft and it was a drive-in kick that turned into a dagger from the corner. Every solution carried a consequence. The loss didn't feel like a collapse. It felt like a duel that tipped on the smallest margins. Afterward, Boston didn't hide from it. She talked about the sting, about how Final Fours linger in your chest longer than most games. She talked about how preparation doesn't guarantee outcomes, how respect is sometimes earned in the act of being beaten by someone extraordinary. "Then we met Caitlin," she said, and there was no bitterness in it, only clarity. That clarity has followed Boston into the WNBA, where irony folded the story back on itself. Indiana Fever. Caitlin Clark. Aliyah Boston. Teammates now, carrying different versions of the same memory. The Final Four loss didn't disappear, it transformed. What once separated them now connects them. In Indiana, Boston's game has evolved without losing its core. She's still the stabilizer, the presence that makes chaos survivable. She sets the tone with her voice and her feet. Clark, meanwhile, brings the electricity, the long-range audacity, the angles no one else attempts. Together, they've learned the language of balance. When to slow, when to surge, when to trust the other to finish the sentence. Boston has spoken about how playing with Clark revealed new layers to that Final Four night. It's easier to understand the storm when you're standing inside it. Clark's work ethic, her obsession with spacing and timing, the way she studies defenses, none of it is accidental. The magic has math behind it. Boston sees that now, not as an opponent scanning for weaknesses, but as a partner building something sustainable. There's a maturity in the way Boston frames the loss today. She doesn't shrink from it, and she doesn't inflate it into myth. It's a chapter, important, instructive, unfinished. She talks about how those moments sharpen you, how they demand honesty. About how greatness isn't just about winning every night, but about meeting other great players at the peak of their powers and surviving the encounter changed. In that sense, Then We Met Caitlin is less a period than a comma. Because the story didn't end in the Final Four. To move, it widened. It followed both players into a league that needs exactly what they bring: Boston's steadiness, Clark's spark, and the shared memory of a night when the game rose to meet them both. Some losses fade into statistics. Others turn into reference points. For Aliyah Boston, that Final Four belongs to the second kind. It's the game she returns to when she talks about preparation and humility, about how basketball has a way of introducing you to yourself through someone else. She'll tell you the truth without dramatics. South Carolina was ready. They executed. They fought. And then, inevitably, unmistakably, they met Caitlin. And in meeting her, Boston didn't lose something she can't get back. She gained a sharper understanding of excellence. One that now lives in the Fever's locker room, stitched into practices, echoed in pick and rolls, and carried forward into a future where rivals can become teammates, and where a single sentence can hold an entire season's worth of meaning. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges of disappointment, but it also polishes the lessons that matter most. For Aliyah Boston, the Final Four loss has become one of those lessons, one she carries not as a burden, but as a compass. When she reflects on that night now, she talks less about missed chances and more about awareness, the realization that sometimes you are playing well, doing everything right, and the opponent is simply operating on another wavelength. That, Boston believes, is what made Caitlin Clark so difficult to stop in that moment. It wasn't just the scoring. It was the confidence that traveled through her teammates, the way belief spread possession by possession. One deep three didn't just add points. It shifted the emotional math of the game. Boston felt it on the defensive end, how even solid coverage could feel fragile against someone who shot without hesitation and passed without fear. As a professional,